three African nations as full members of the bloc: South Africa, Ethiopia and Egypt, and other nations as partner nations. We loud calls at this summit for more African countries to join. Are we finally stepping into a future where Africa shapes the rules rather than simply playing by them? Brazilian president and others criticized the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank during the summit. While we asked if Brics can be a true alternative to the IMF and World Bank, we highlight that we envisage Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, now a Brics partner like other African nations present, to secure real economic wins for the African continent. Beyond the lofty communiques, what does all this mean for young Africans seeking jobs, for farmers competing on unfair terms, and for tech startups in need of capital? Is Brics 2025 Africa's shot at true economic freedom, or are we chasing yet another mirage? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Point. To stay with us. Hello Africa and the world. It's always a pleasure to be in your company, and this is the moment for the African continent. There have been more calls for African nations to join the Brics bloc of emerging economies, and it's worth noting that as of 2025, earlier 2025, we saw more African countries being integrated as partner nations amid the three others that were already existing as full members within the bloc. Meanwhile, at this juncture, we asked the question: is this Africa's opportunity for the continent to attain true economic freedom, which it has always dreamed of? We shall be unpacking this and more with our guests this day, and to unpack our panel of experts this day, I'm being joined first of all the way from Nigeria by TITILOPE, ANIFOWOSHE in her capacity as a lawyer. It's a pleasure to have you on board. As reiterated by the Minister of International Relations and Corporations of South Africa, Ronald Lamola, he stated that it's imperative for more African countries to integrate the bloc as the continent strives to gain economic independence. So I'll debate with you, TITILOPE. Now, in your capacity, or in your from your own point of view, is Brics truly opening its doors to the African continent, or is simply expanding its influence to African countries without granting them the real decision-making power?
Well, very well, thank you. It's good to be here once again. I believe that the whole concept of Brics is a huge departure from the norm. For the first time in a very long time, countries outside the bracket of supposed world powers are choosing to come together to do something not just for the big boys, but for themselves. As of today, we do not have a huge number of African countries. At the same time, when we look at South Africa, when we look at Nigeria, when we look at Egypt, Ethiopia, Uganda, Algeria, we can say that they represent the strategic resources or the strategic positioning of Nigeria. Now, as a matter of fact, we need to see Brics not just from the concept of UN or G7. Yeah, it's more like having peers who are first amongst. Of course, we are first among equals, but it's just like having peers working together for their own good. Now, it is rather too early for us to assert that Brics is either to the advantage or to the disadvantage of African nations. But considering the whole essence of the creation of Brics, I think it is safe to assert that we are on the right path. It is also safe to assert, considering the relationships between these nations. As of today, China, for example, is Nigeria's biggest economic partner. China, and if you also look at the terms of interaction between Chinese nations, China and African nations, you will see that it is not one-sided. It is not lopsided. It is both parties are able to benefit effectively through infrastructure, which in my opinion is long-term. So I think it is too early for us to conclude or assert that Africans are at a disadvantage. But with some of the progress and the investment of BRICS in South Africa, in Egypt, in Utopia, I think it's safe to say that they are on the right track. Thank you.
Thank you too. Like you reiterated, it's quite too early, but you equally shared the same opinion as the foreign minister of South Africa, where he stated that they have helped these countries, you know, in expanding at the economic level. Now over to you, Dr. Eddie. They mentioned that they are working towards the BRICS spirit, as was reaffirmed during the summit. What does that mean for, you know, Africans that might be seeking jobs, that need investments, that are, you know, looking to better trading opportunities, like was reiterated last year in Kazan, Russia?
Thank you, Sharon. I think the spirit that the BRICS leadership and representatives are talking about in here may also have to do with the non-alignment movement. And I believe that, you know, what the president of Brazil, Lula Inácio da Silva, reminded us of that and then went back to that. We all know that, you know, at the end of the Second World War, as many countries under Western European countries, you know, were colonization, were gaining their independence, as the world also split into two factions, as we say, this bipolar world. There was this non-alignment movement. We remember what happened, you know, in Indonesia that led to the creation of that. At the time, you know, in Africa, you have leaders like, you know, Gamal Abdel Nasser, you know, from Egypt. You have the Ghanaian president Kwame Nkrumah, who truly led the charge for the African countries to join this non-alignment movement. And I think that that is the spirit, right? That spirit of not being necessarily aligned, and the spirit of this inclusive cooperation, as they talked about. What does that mean? It means true cooperation at a time when and where countries not only have the fair share, but can express themselves, can express, you know, what their interest in the global arena outside of the what we have seen since that end of the Second World War, with the creation of the Bretton Woods institution, the World Bank and the IMF, that has led till today. Another portion of that, you know, what non-alignment or non-alignment is the BRICS spirit, you know, as it is said, after over 60 years of independence, especially in for the African countries, the United Nations system, how it is, it has been operating. And we know that the BRICS, you know, are also hinting on that. It's not just about the IMF or the World Bank, the way they are structured and the way they work. It is also about, you know, other international institutions that intervene in the maintenance of peace, for instance, in the world. So, Sharon, in nutshell, this is what I believe that is being referred to as the spirits of the BRICS. And this is very much needed for the African countries that continue to search for alternative ways to ensure not just, you know, economic freedom, economic growth, stable, durable economic growth and economic, you know, development, but also political stability and social, economic, and cultural development as well.
Dr. Eddie. Now over to you, Barrister. You mentioned earlier on that China stands to be one of the biggest economic partners of Nigeria. Now, as of January 2025, up to this moment, since when Nigeria became a partner nation of the BRICS, could you estimate, do you see Nigeria's status as a BRICS partner nation translating into tangible economic benefits for its people, especially being the most populous African country?
Well, very well, thank you. Annually, China has about 250 billion investment annually in Nigeria. When you walk around the nation, some of our biggest, most capital consuming projects are currently being executed by Chinese owned companies. Now, it's not about the cost of this project, but about the impact of the project. I want to take a little reference into the Bible. Connecting cities, the railway that we have right now in Nigeria that connects our cities, the roads that connect multifaceted, vast geography are executed by Chinese companies with Chinese quality. Now, beyond that, let's even go to Brazil, for example, pharmaceuticals, resources. So I think that beyond Nigeria being the most populous black nation, Nigeria is currently the only nation in West Africa that is a partner or a member of Brics. Nigeria has a very strategic sitting geographically in West Africa, in Africa as a whole. What this means is that we should also not forget that just recently, I'm talking about last week, we recently just completed our tenure as leaders of ECOWAS. What this means is that if not just Nigeria, if Africa or if West Africa can continue to stay coordinated with the terms, with the same aspiration we have with implementing AFCFTA and what have you, it will be very easy for us to have a strong position while negotiating for terms. Because beyond looking at it from the angle of Nigeria or Africa wanting to benefit from their membership in Brics, these nations, Brazil, China, Russia, UAE, they also have so much to benefit from us. In the past, India used to have some of the cheapest labor, but right now, Africa has the cheapest labor. Africa has the youngest population right now. So what this means is that whilst we are looking at what black nations stand to gain from the membership in Brics, we also have to try to look at what they stand to gain from being in alliance with us. And we would never be able to position ourselves to tap into the vastness of the resources and opportunities that we have with them if we aren't coordinated, if we are trying to join Brics as units but not as blocks. So for Nigeria, you would attest to the fact that right now our economy isn't at its best position, but by virtue of reforms and policies that are currently ongoing, Nigeria is sitting on vast wealth and a huge promise for a very beautiful future. So our presence in Brics is not just going to benefit our people, it's going to benefit the West African region, Africa, and also all of the nations on Brics. Thank you.
Thank you too. But I would like to ask you a question before I get leave of you.
Okay.
Now, you mentioned that it's imperative for the Nigeria or Africa to relate with Brics as a bloc and not as an individual nation. Is that correct?
Very well. Very well.
Okay.
Very well.
Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Eddie. Now, you listened to your co-panelists, and in a bit to move forward, since we were discussing this, just a while ago we saw the U.S. President Donald Trump that threatened some extra 10% tariffs on Brics. Away from that, with calls of more African countries to integrate the bloc, as you know, was reiterated by your co-panelists, how prepared do you think are African economists and institutions to engage on this equal footing?
Currently, we are honestly not quite well prepared. The reason being that anytime there's been the announcement of any tariff, increase on the side of a major partner, maybe the United States or any other country. Currently, it is the United States. We have seen it in the case of a country such as Lesotho, for instance. It already and automatically sends waves. It is a new shock for these countries, right? Again, because of this lack of preparedness. And the lack of preparedness is also based on where the economies of those countries, will stand when it comes to their participation in the global markets. First thing to consider. But even second thing to consider is the relationship with the BRICS countries themselves. It is a good thing or promising as we hear about the volume of trades that we know may have reached something like, the 500,000 billions in recent years. And we can see that, from the time when the BRICS are starting the forming, taking shape from the first summit in 2009, with all of the major investments that have taken place since now and since then and now, we see that, there is a steady increase.
True.
All that because of the steady growth of trade relations between many African countries and the BRICS groups as well. But even that one also, the topic that you bring today is on point as we talk about the preparedness of those African countries to deal with all of these stressors, whether they are moving in the positive way or in the negative way, as what we just talked about, the threats, from the U.S. administration of levying a 10%, tariff trades. Most of our countries are not prepared. Today, we are dealing with the access to critical materials, critical minerals. This is the new El Dorado. This is the new Russia. This is the new debate that what we have on the table today. Not long ago, about a week ago, we heard of this peace between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo that has been brokered under the tutelage of the United States. We should understand that we are talking about the DRC. We are talking about access to important and critical minerals that will be, minerals that will be critical for the future of the economy of the countries in the world as well. So, to not using all of these examples, the point I was trying to make in here, Sharon, again, is I doubt, right, that we are strongly and fully prepared. How can we be prepared to face all these new shocks and stressors when our countries continue to reel in debt, for instance, when our countries continue to be very and heavily indebted when it comes to the IMF and the World Bank, when we have countries such as my beloved Nigeria that has in the past years dealt with high inflation since President Tinubu has arrived, for instance, and we know what this inflation has caused for workers, for families, for people in general, in the abilities and the capacities, to purchase basic necessities, for instance. So again, are those countries prepared? No. Will they ever be prepared? The answer to that question, optimistically, for somebody like me who is an Afro-optimistic, yes, we have to go in that direction, and then we see more and more. By the way, the idea, the desire to diversify Africa's partners, right, as we see more and more, and then our sister TITILOPE talked about that, earlier, is actually a move toward, finding a better pathways, diversifying, what the opportunities for Africa to truly arrive at the level of economic stability where they can fairly, strongly also compete with the other nations of the world, but not always being considered as countries in the margin. For instance, when there is the G7 or the G20, Africa is at the margin. And even today, when we are talking about the BRICS, though you have the president of South Africa in there, it will be more so to say, Nigeria move to become a full partner, Uganda and others, so that many more African countries, that will lead to a diversification of Africa's partners when it comes to economy, but also when it comes to the political affiliation, when it comes to other things that we call, geopolitical, strategy in there. There is no strong economy without a strong military. There is no strong economy without a strong, political and diplomatic partnership. Will not be a strong Africa emerging economically without potentially reforms at the United Nations, how the Security Council is dealt with, for instance.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eddie. Now, moving over to you, TITILOPE, you listen to your co-panelists, and of course, you both are in sync. Now, to start the ball rolling, does Brics really offer, just to pick up from where he stopped, really offer a true alternative to Western-dominated systems, like we mentioned earlier in the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and especially at a time when we still have countries on the African continent that are reeling from the impacts of aid cuts from nations like the United States. And of course, you mentioned in your previous response that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu stated that though there are sweeping reforms ongoing in Nigeria, the economy is actually doing well.
Well, very well, thank you very much. So here's the thing. There is a new development bank established by Brics, already started projects in Africa. I think they have renewable energy project in South Africa. They have transport infrastructure project. They have water management system. These projects are currently in South Africa alone, South Africa and I think Egypt. There is currently no Brics-sponsored project in Nigeria at the moment. But I believe that post this, there's currently a convergence of Brics nations right now in Brazil. I believe that after this convergence, there would be a better clarity. Suffice to note that Nigeria only accepted to be a part of Brics in January. Yeah,
exactly.
So what that means is that it's been about 5 months. Yeah, it's been about 5 months. And let's also not forget that this nation have strong existing ties with the United States of America, for example, UK, for example. I mean, UK is our colonial masters. We have a massive influx of our citizens in these countries. We have huge relations with them. So I personally would assert that it's safer for Nigeria to be a partner and not rush into being a full member of Brics, considering the strong ties it has with America. It is also important for us to note that the de-dollarization that Brics, that is the strongest selling point of Brics, is currently not close to its execution or close to its success. And the whole essence of having an economic strength is to be able to trade amongst nations with currencies that is largely to the advantage of these nations. Now, if only Russia, for example, is strongly putting its feet forward assertively for the dollarization, I think that all other nations, especially African nations, should actually tread with caution. I am aware that as Africans who have gone through a long history of colonialism and a very recent history of imperialism, it is very easy for us to get excited with something that seems like us shelving away from dictatorship or shelving away from neocolonialism. At the end of the day, we must be very strategic with our alliance with these nations, because as much as it seems like equitable representation, as much as it seems like, okay, these nations trying to work for their own good, they are first amongst equals. there are nations who are stronger than nations. So whilst we are, trying to get benefit from our membership or association with BRICS, I'll assert again that it is very necessary for Africans to actually try to look into the possibility of seamless economic relationship amongst themselves. When I can conveniently send money from Nigeria to Cameroon, when I can conveniently do business with somebody from Côte d'Ivoire, when I can fly to Côte d'Ivoire without sitting for long hours, there and then it is easier for us to now be able to sit at a stronger and convenience negotiation side with any nation, be it China, be it Russia, no matter how powerful they are, no matter how wealthy they are. But if and when Africans cannot work on their own economic stability, work on their own economic viability, no matter how promising that regional or that international organization is, we will never be able to get the best out of it. So whilst talking about de-dollarization, what is happening to us, Africa, having similar or one unitary currency to be able to transact? So for me, I really do not want to delve so much into what Nigeria or Africa is going to get from BRICS. I'm very much interested in how Africa is going to get the best out of BRICS, not what Africa will get out of BRICS. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Very powerful contribution. Back to you, Dr. Eddie. You shared some opinion as TITILOPE, and of course, she mentioned earlier on, which was reiterated during the summit, that of course the highlighted key areas like infrastructure, green energy, health partnerships, amongst others. But then again, she mentioned the realities on the ground when it comes to the African continent. So from your own perspective, Africa working on concretizing cross-border trade, having a single currency, be it from region to region or for the entire continent as a whole, and of course the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AfCFTA. Do you think all this, setting this priority straight, is actually going to, result in Africa gaining a true economic freedom?
Listen, I can not. There is no any ounce of disagreement with what the sister said. It's just a matter of how it is a frame, but it is well and clearly well said. My hope, and as I always say with my stupidly optimistic mind, and I don't say that, in a very derogatory way, but I am staunchly optimistic when it comes to the future of Africa. And the reason why I say this, Sharon, is in my ability sometimes and grace to travel from country to country in Africa. When I land in Abuja, Nigeria, when I land in Lagos, it is not necessarily the buildings or the decision makers or the policy makers, but when on a daily basis you go to a market, maybe the largest market in Lagos, whose name Icheka, I think market, I forget the name now, but whenever you go to that market and then you see on a daily basis men and women in what we call the informal labor sector, working very hard. Not long ago, we heard about, how cassava, which is a staple food #1 in Nigeria, is, becoming more and more, getting more and more investment in terms of how it is going to become, the production, should increase to the point that, it should benefit, of course, what the cassava growers in here. That gives me hope. When from Nigeria you land in Nairobi, you land in Monrovia, even in the midst of what we call these economic difficulties of people, trying to find ways, there is always this hope. And I believe in it. And that's where it comes from. So to come back to the question that you have asked, yes, as we look at the volume of trade that is increasing between the BRICS organization and the African countries, especially when you look at what is happening between China and a number of African countries, we should mention, for instance, this major road infrastructure, the Belt and Road, initiative, which is currently being sponsored by China. Major, things are in there. But at the same time, we need to come to the table every time there is a BRICS summit. African experts like me, my sister in there, and others, the question we should ask is, what is the measurement stick? The yardstick from point A in 2009 up to now. Where are we going? We need to come up, and I know that it exists somewhere, but it needs to be systematized. What are the metrics, what are the indicators of a progress that what we are using to actually measure and determine and assess whether or not Africa is gaining economically, politically, in terms of military security? There are a multiplicity of dimensions that we should look at. Maybe we have faltered in doing that, but there are people, African intellectuals, that have been involved in the BRICS summit years after years, and who are promoting that. We need to bring them to the table, follow what they are doing more and more. And why do I say this? I say this for the following reasons. Reason number one, have we deeply, seriously evaluated the type of concessions, especially the land concessions, or the construction concessions, or the concession when it comes to to mining? Because we are hearing more and more of people, workers, complaining of how they are treated when it comes to working in those BRICS countries, leading countries owned, and operated the factories, for instance. This is key, and this is very important. When you look at, and there are plenty of reports. Not long ago, actually, something funny. I mean, they're portrayed as something funny, but it is not. When some police officers went to a rural area somewhere in Africa, I'm not going to name that for the sake of not making mistake, but it's the example that we see everywhere. What happened? The Chinese operators were arrested, and one wanted the water. And the police officer said, no, you're not going to be drinking water. I need to drink the water. Why? Because look over there. Your operations did what? Polluted the waterways, polluted the lands that the people are living on. Sharon and our dear listeners for today's show, as we talk about economic growth, what does that mean when the people of Africa do not have access or see their waterways, their environments being polluted because of this type of operations from, let's say, frankly, from Chinese, companies? Years ago, we talked about how Shell and all these oil companies, right, left areas in Nigeria devastated. And we know what it led to. If Ken Saro-Wiwa in Nigeria was, executed the way it was, in a very unfair, unjust manner, it is because of the protest of the people for the land pollution resulting from the oil exploitation. Are we having the same look for these Chinese operated companies? We need to. We need to. We need to call. When a country such as China, one time, we hear that, was seized at the airport of Uganda, we need to question that. When it comes to fishing, we need to check that. So, Sharon, want to land on that, very quickly. Another thing that is dear to us is, again, the safety of people. The safety of people. Do we have international standard when it comes to workers' rights being respected in the companies that are operated by the leading countries of the BRICS? For me, these are the fundamental questions that what needs again to be raised. And I will conclude on this by saying that yes, the African Continental Free Trade Agreements, any other bilateral Even the regional economic communities such as the ECOWAS, such as the SADC and all that, needed to up the game. The ECOWAS, when it was created in 1990, with the help of the military rulers, in Nigeria, in 1975, I'm sorry, with the help of the military rulers, the purpose, the goal of the ECOWAS was to reduce the volume of trade between the African countries and the European countries, and maximize the volume of trade between the countries of the region. Where are we today? How do we become, therefore, economically strong countries or an economically strong sub-region without this? The sister said it well. Why somebody will have to travel, even within Nigeria, hours, between Nigeria and Cameroon, hours, between Côte d'Ivoire and Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire and Monrovia, hours? Where are the roads? I think economic stability, economic development and growth start with those things. And I believe that, these are, again, questions that we need to do a better job in terms of year after year, again, developing clear metric system indicators to measure where the BRICS is taking us and what the African countries are benefiting from that.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've been a bit long on that one,
no,
but
it's
I wanted
okay.
to give
Thank you so much, Dr. Eddie. Now, Atiti, I see you have a lot of points to add up to what Dr. Eddie said. No problem. But then, I'm wondering if you share the same opinion as your co-panelists. Why reiterating that when we look at the context, the landscape of the African continent, we notice that we've had countries, take for instance a nation like Nigeria that has had to deal with Boko Haram amidst other issues at the level of security. We've had countries at the moment, we're talking of the Democratic Republic of Congo, dealing with the crisis in the eastern part of the nation. We're looking at a nation like Sudan that still has a power struggle in its country. Amidst others, when we look at this internal discords within the continent, do you think some of these issues are what are impeding Africa's strive for economic independence?
Certainly. Unfortunately, the northern Nigeria, for example, is used to be known for the versatility of their agricultural produce. Today, the biggest rationale behind huge inflation in Nigeria is insecurity. Insecurity per the fact that farmers cannot go to farm for fear of being abducted, for fear of being killed. Basic English. Let's not give figures and all that. You have huge inflation when you can't feed yourself. You have huge inflation when you do not have enough to be able to provide for the basic things that you ought to ordinarily be able to do with little resources. That's the most basic definition of inflation. In Congo, for example, thousands of people were displaced. I personally have somebody whom I used to do business with in Congo, but we couldn't continue with the interaction because she had to leave the city where she was, where she had a business, for safety. Now, these are the most familiar and basic effects of insecurity, corruption, and what have you, because they are closely knitted. Now, back to what Doctor said. Another thing that we aren't looking at is the fact that, unlike United Nations, unlike even African Union, BRICS does not have strong legal instruments. Everything, of course, aside the new development bank, that is being done in BRICS is per gentleman's agreement. Who does that sort of agreement benefit? What is the implication of withdrawing from such gentleman's agreement? If there is an issue of conflict with regards to the agreement, where do you go? What court do you go? What arbitration panel do you approach? Who are going to be at the receiving end of a default by either of the party? Now, the answers, in my own opinion, to these posers bring us back to the fact that no thief, no terrorist can terrorize a territory without the support of the residents of the territory. No terrorism can last for months and weeks and years without the input of the authorities of that geography. No corruption can linger for so long when there are strong legal implications for such actions or inaction. And no crime would continue to fester when there are strong legal systems with strong implication and consequences for the commission or omission of such action. What this means, in my opinion, is that for Africa to move past these excuses, these excesses, these inadequacies, Africa needs to be deliberate about the development of Africa. Suffice to note that the destination of some of these loots, some of the products of this corruption are in these places that we tag Sena climes. Do not also forget that the agencies and the conditions required for the repatriation of the proceeds of this loot, the handlers are in these Sena climes. What that means is that for us to be able to be on a strong standing, we must be ready to fix ourselves. Now, and this is beyond talking to authorities, politicians, or government officials. It is about the average African, the average young African, the young Nigerian, the young Cameroonian, the uneducated woman, the uneducated man who gives intel to terrorists, who thinks that having these terrorists as friends is a way of showing loyalty to some tribe, to some religious sentiment, or to some bias. To every African on the African soil or even in diaspora, for us to be able to fix our continent, for us to be able to fix our nations, we must be ready. We must be ready to be a part of that development, to be a part of that vehicle that is going to drive us to prosperity. And this isn't about revolution. This isn't about a political bias or sentiment. It is about being genuinely serious about wanting to get that great future for Africa. So whether it's Brics, whether it's another promising organization in the nearest future, we as Africans would never be able to get the best out of it when we do not fix our rooms. It's just like having a dirty room and expecting not to have typhoid. It's almost impossible. So for us not to continue to drink dirty waters, for us not to continue to, hinge our issues on corrupt politicians and what have you, it starts with you and I. Thank you.
Exactly. You mentioned it very well. It starts with you and I. And now back to you, Dr. Eddie. We've mentioned that everybody has a role to play in taking the African continent forward. But there's something you mentioned in your previous response. You stated that Africa needs to, stand for itself. Africa needs to take put in place all the parameters that will take the continent to achieving economic freedom. But then, when you look at the continent as of now, Titi stated that we should be looking at whether it's another bloc or it's the BRICS. At some point, Africa would have to, have its own, be that continent that it wants to be before it can sit on a decision table with other blocs. Now, she equally mentioned that we have China, we equally have Russia that are existent on the African continent, and they are growing very fast in terms of their influence. With that said, do you see, looking at the continent where we're striving for economic freedom, do you think that Africa is risking new forms of dependency by turning towards the BRICS, given the stakes of other, foreign countries on the continent?
If we continue to work with the type of leadership that we have, well, yes, we may be treading on the path of another situation of another subservient, situation, or another situation in which the continent will again play the walking mats, for other nations. If it happened once, it can happen again. It is not a matter of who is the less of the evils that we have to deal with. I believe that, and I forget the name of who wrote that, but you all probably heard about this book, 50 Years is Enough, in which, a collection of essays in criticism of the IMF and the World Bank, and what we know today, the Bretton Woods institution. I want to catch that phrase, was 60 years of being considered a non-developed, a developing continent is enough. It is enough because of all of the resources, not just the mineral, not the natural resources, but also the human resources that what the continent has. Our sister said it earlier. We are the continent. I mean, it is a statistics that everybody is sharing now. We are the continent who in the next 5-10 years will have almost 40% of the youngest population able-bodies, on this planet Earth. This morning, as I was listening to NPR News also, there is this growing concern about the number of babies being born. We are human beings. We talk about development, we talk about workers, we talk about what else? Even for countries that love to fight in other countries, you fight not with machines. Even if you have the best weaponry, you need the people to manipulate these weaponry to guide them to do things in there. So human beings are important. Men and women, girls and boys are important in there. So yes, there is quite a number of things that certainly and clearly the continents need to put in place. Sharon, in your question, you have so far insisted a lot on China and Russia. I want us to remember that we talk about the BRICS countries, Brazil and India, as partners have also been great, especially in what we call the South-South, cooperation.
True.
And I know that, China and Russia also qualify for those, but I want us to highlight, what these two. When you have leaders who really have the stake of the continent, in their heart, where we can move in the direction that we want. However, looking also at a brand of emerging leaders, right, in some African countries, whether they are in power today or they're not, whether they are not in the highest position to make decisions or represent their countries or the African countries, I still, again, awkwardly, stupidly, optimistically believe that, there is this brand of leadership that is in preparation to think about the continent of Africa that strategically positions itself not at the periphery, but with a greater effort to actually be the core, to be at the center. And I'm sure that this is the reason why many countries diplomats and let's say scholars clapped when they heard about Nigeria moving or inching, right, to become a partner of the BRICS. As we say, outside of these big realms, if you are not sitting at the table to make a decision, you will be on the table being chopped as the menu. Which one of the positions do we want? Since we were in high school, in college, preparing our doctoral thesis, and here and there, we have heard of Africa remaining at the margin, at the periphery. We remember in way back in the 1990s, late 1990s, before he left the power, when American presidents, Bill Clinton, talking about, Africa's, representation when the World Trade Organization was being formed, about what being only 2%. Why the World Trade? We have to be or represent such a minimal percentage in it, whereas we are one of the largest continents, and then we are the continent endowed with all these natural resources that we are talking about. So, are we, to summarize this question and my answer, are we poised to see an African continent becoming again or entering a kind of a neo-colonial situation or relationship with the BRICS countries, especially the most dominant ones, China and Russia? Or are we going to see an African continent that deals with those countries on a more equal footage? My answer is, if we are moving with certain type of leaders that we have today, who believe to please their people, right, that we are going this way to show that, we are some sort of revolutionaries, and playing therefore, one, the better of the two devils against the other, then yes, we are, clearly and with the speed going toward this situation of neocolonialism, this time under either China or Russia. On the other hand, if we understand what is at stake, and with this new type of a young leadership that what we and I am referring to, I am sure that we can also be within the BRICS in a situation that is not necessarily a copy, of neocolonialism, but a more of a relationship on an equal footage. I was losing my words in there. So, Sharon, this is what I share. Therefore, it means that we need to continue to critically challenge the current leadership that we have.
Thank you so much.
When we have leaders, I'm sorry, I'm going to end on that. When we have leaders who continue to manipulate their constitution to remain in power, let me give you a clear example. The ECOWAS was supposed to create a common currency. It's one of their goals. This currency was supposed to come up. A deadline was 2005. We are in 2025. This currency is not yet in there. But a few years ago, if the Nigerian president at the time, the former, was not strong enough, the ECO will have become Nigeria's, Nigeria, the ECOWAS, a currency, which actually is nothing but a rebranding of the French CFA. That's what was supposed to happen, or was about to happen, if the leaders in West Africa were not, were smart or vigilant enough. And why? Because the leadership in Côte d'Ivoire was ready to sell the ECOWAS, common currency, replacing it with the currency being used in Côte d'Ivoire, which is, again, something that people are critiquing, and which is actually one of the mechanisms through which France continues to control the economies of those so-called, French-speaking countries. I wanted to use that example, Sharon, before I land on that question. It's a matter of leadership, again, to answer your question.
Indeed, it is a matter of leadership. Thank you, Mansley, Dr. Eddie Eric. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is Talking Point on 4U Media Africa. You're watching us on 4U Television. and of course listening to us over the airways of FM 96.34 U radio, and we are streaming on our respective social media platforms. Meanwhile, we proceed today's conversation where we're discussing how Africa can attain economic freedom while taking or benefiting from the opportunity of the Brics that is taking place in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Meanwhile, to proceed with the conversation, back to you, Barrister TITILOPE. Now, you listen to your co-panelist, and of course, he had a lot to say as far as advancing the continent is concerned. But meanwhile, while we're having this very difficult conversation, what mechanisms, from your perspective, needs to be put into place for a better integration on the African continent, you know, a better collaboration amongst African countries so we can attain the freedom when it comes to the sphere of, you know, economic independence on the African continent?
Thank you very much. I'm actually learning from some of the things he's saying. So, for one, number one is every African nation has to see the integration of Africa not from the angle of positioning their own nation at the forefront or at the detriment of other nations. You see, it's United Kingdom, England, yeah, there is a level of patriotism. There is a perspective that you find in people from that clime that you don't find here. I think one of the biggest problems is the fact that we are already divided across so many factors before we even start talking about us being Africans. As a matter of fact, most Africans talk about being Africans by virtue of the color of their skin, not by virtue of what they think of Africa. So, for instance, I'm first a Yoruba, I'm first a Igbo before I think of being Yoruba, before I think of being from Southwest, then being a Muslim, being this, being that, and all that. There needs to be a campaign. There needs to be I am an African campaign for every person across the African continent. When we see Africa as one, when it is not only the African Cup of Nations or the CAF that unites us, when we see ourselves as African, not by virtue of the color of our skin, or by virtue of what we have in our hearts, then it is going to be easy for me to think of business partners not towards America or Canada, but towards Liberia, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, and what have you first. Secondly, we also need to be able to push beyond ECOWAS, beyond United Nations, about how connected we are. Why can't I be able to take a train from Lagos to Seme? Why do I need to pay $1,000 for me to be able to fly from Lagos to Monrovia? So, secondly, we need to actually ensure that Africans understand the benefits of being connected. Do not forget that it doesn't just take the deliberateness of government officials to ensure connectivity. For how many years have we been talking about AFCFTA? For how many years have we been talking about its implementation? When we have young ICT experts who can build solutions via technology where they can enhance and make seamless transactions across the African border. Thirdly, the issue of democracy must be defined. What exactly does democracy mean? What is the difference between democracy and good governance? What sort of leadership suits Africans? Do we demonize military leadership on the first level? Or do we try as a people to actually identify the sort of governance that fits us? Or do we just accept hook, line, and sinker what America or what France says is the best system of government for us? Fourthly, we also as a people need to be deliberate about the sort of future we want. It's okay for experts, for people who have lived beautiful lives to put themselves forward, for Africans to vote for them, to elect them for leadership position. But it's a different ballgame when people get distracted by, we call it stomach infrastructure in Nigeria, by what they stand to gain, by their immediate gains, and end up voting for the persons with the fattest pocket. Fifth, as a people, we need to start asking questions about what ECOWAS is doing. Like you mentioned, we need to do more with M&E, monitoring and evaluating. There was a time when the people of Liberia were particularly excited about voting a football legend as their president. 6 years later, the same people who were excited voted that same person out. Did he or did he not try his best? What are the yardsticks that we use to measure good governance? Is it by the population of the ethnic zone that these leaders come from? Or is it by the sustainable development that we can see? Or by the bags of rice or millets that they are able to share? I believe, and I'm very, very deliberate about not hanging this on our government officials or our elected officials. I'm very deliberate about it because I believe that an informed electorate is the biggest, strongest, and fastest pathway to development. When the people are awake and ready to get a bright future for generations unborn, the nation, the society, or the community will witness a rebirth that can never be imagined. Thank you.
Thank you too. And just to reiterate, we're just gradually coming to the end of today's edition of the program. Now, over to you, Dr. Eddie. Now, you mentioned earlier on that the world is gradually moving towards multipolarity. With this global shift which we are seeing, is BRICS Africa's best shot at rewriting trade rules? Because a few days ago, we saw Turkey that signed a couple of memoranda of understanding with numerous African countries, to a tally of about 7 of them, where they were going to open doors to link them up with trade corridors, so they can be able to develop in their respective communities. So away from that, do you see, in a bit to just oppose these two ideas, do you see this as some sort of way through which the African continent cooperating economically with the rest of the world on the global market can get fair deals through the BRICS?
Is it the best way? I'm going to authorize myself to remove the word best out of a caution, as our sister warned in her contribution, and just use just the term, it's a way. It is a way. It is a way to leveling the playground, especially for the African countries. Another way is, of course, this multiplication of partners. We just mentioned Turkey. Let us not forget that, even countries such as the United, Arab Emirates are signing or growing their presence also in Africa with different types of trade, land concessions, and things. Another thing that, we also need to mention clearly, Sharon, we have seen in terms of movements of people and of goods. In recent years, there have been a new trade or a new business route We hear more so of informal labor sector women or business, men and women traveling to Dubai, traveling to those countries. This is something that needs also to be taken into consideration. But adding on to that, the volume of young people today who are actually taking these migration corridors, this time not to North America or to Europe, but to the Arab countries, the Gulf state countries where they go seek work. And we know the conditions in which these people work in there. Why is it important, Sharon, to mention all of those things? It is important because, number one, it shows that in terms of economic opportunities, growing, trade routes, and even diplomatic ties that what the African continent or the countries of Africa are interested in, there are new dimensions to those things that need to be truly explored because they all contribute to the continent's development. What is the volume of remittances, for instance, that enter the African countries from those who are working in those Gulf state countries, for instance, right? What is the volume of remittances that come into those countries from those who are working or the African diaspora in North America or in Europe? These are the things we need to consider. First reason. Second reason why I believe that the BRICS is one opportunity, but not necessarily the best opportunity, is again, what we are looking and we are waiting to see. The true long-term dividends, right, of these engagements. I already told you, we need to revisit, evaluate the type of deals, concessions, and partnerships that are on the table. It does not suffice to say, okay, China does not intermingle in our democracies or our political situation, does not give us any lessons or whatever it is. Therefore, we will rather deal with that partner than deal with others. If China does not do that, my sister TITILOPE and I will be doing that because we need to hold our leaders, we need to hold our governments accountable, for good governance, for transparency. Because today, one of the things that, is also killing, we have not measured yet the presence of China, the presence of Russia also in Africa. To what extent do those presence are fueling kleptocracy, which means they're stealing the theft, of our funds, national revenues that escape, what normal channel revenue coffers to offshore banks and investment in other places. Have we tracked that? When we are able to do all those things, we'll be in a better position to evaluate whether it is the best or it is not the best. But again, Sharon, I believe we should, out of caution, look at the BRICS opportunity today. And any other countries that are increasing the volume of the trade with Africa or partnership with Africa as the multiple different ways that the African countries today, strategically, and I emphasize that, strategically, should be using to move forward. As we talked about economic development, which is the topic of today's show, we should not be blindsided by other considerations. There is no strong economy without a strong political or a viable political environment.
Thank you.
There is no strong economy without a stable peaceful environment. And all of those dimensions you touch upon with the different questions that you ask. So it is the sum of all of those things which truly will stabilize. To what extent a country will be economically strong when its population is being displaced all the time because of insecurity? When the population is being displaced, it means what? It means less production of cassava, or whether this cassava or cocoa or whatever it is produced is going to be stolen, escape the normal channel, and the black market is going to be fueled. Poverty will increase somewhere in there. All of those things are therefore interconnected, Sharon. I want to land on that.
Thank you. And of course, I will get one last reaction before we close up, Dr. Eddie. Meanwhile, back to you, Barry TITILOPE. Now, have a listen to your co-panelists. We're gradually coming to the end. Looking forward, ahead of 2025. You mentioned earlier on that it's rather too early for us to be able to make firm decisions or firm conclusions vis-a-vis Africa's stance with regards to the BRICS. But then looking forward into 2025 and beyond, what would true economic freedom be like for you, for the African continent?
Thank you very much. Well, let me quote Doctor. I also want to be stupidly optimistic. Of course, the future is bright.
Exactly.
The future is bright. More than ever before, we saw how ECOWAS, for example, handled the numerous coups in Chad, in Burkina Faso, and what have you. We saw how they worked together towards that. We also saw how the elections played out in Ghana. We saw the elections in Liberia also. We're seeing some level of maturity from the angle of the people and from leadership. Increasingly, the social media has enhanced the call for transparency. And it's now easy for people to effectively call or seek accountability from their leadership. What this means is that per economic freedom, we're gradually getting there. We have a very young population. We have a young population that is steadily becoming remarkable with the use of technology. Now, with the infusion of this technology, we are also seeing an increasingly educated population. In the past, people could get their high school certificate and be satisfied. In the past, people could probably get their BSc and be satisfied. Now we have an increasing number of young Africans pursuing their master's degree, pursuing their PhD. What this means is that we are becoming more enlightened. We are knowing more. We are also seeing an increase in diaspora remittance. So cumulatively, I believe that our pathway to economic freedom, albeit tied closely to our young population, is looking promising. And the next 10 years, if we can act good leadership, Africa is definitely going to be a continent to reckon with. I'm very confident about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansley. And that was TITILOPE ANIFOWOSHE, who was joining us all the way from Nigerian Her capacity as a lawyer. Meanwhile, to culminate today's conversation, Dr. Eddie Eric, you listen to your co-panelists. Now, to wrap up this conversation, it's true that we are the currents, Africa, like she said, if we take into consideration all the suggestions that have been made all through today's edition and previous, of course, Africa would be that great continent as always wanted to be. So, from your perspective, what is your message to the African people?
The BRICS is an opportunity, truly. But the better opportunity for the continents is to look at all of its partnership by putting at the core the interest of the people. There is no way all these construction, road infrastructures, everything, and even the new development bank money, if it is a bank, it means that it's going to be loaning some money for development as well, even if it is at a lower interest rate. We are not there yet. But even if we get to that, what will be the benefit of receiving a loan if those loans are actually escaping the national coffers or the loans are escaping the route that they should be actually trading on for Africa's development. We all know the level of corruption. We all know the level of bad governance that's were led to what we have known last year as the end bad governance protests everywhere. In Nigeria, but not just in Nigeria, in many of the African countries battling with inflation. So my last word again, today to culminate that economic freedom for Africa is not a dream. Or if it is a dream, it is not the type of a dream that can never become a reality. It can become a reality. We've seen and we have some African countries or some countries on the African continent that are investing in reducing their debt, investing in social and economic infrastructure, investing in things that are profitable, definitely not just for their citizens, for the people who live there, but for the people who work. So with that hope, we believe that anytime the African countries, will enter in a deal with the BRICS countries or any other partners from everywhere in the world, they should put that at the heart of the intervention. Sharon, I want to say thank you for the opportunity you gave us to be on that show again. And my sister Titi, my pleasure being with you on that show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eddie Eric, Global Politics Consultant and Executive Secretary of Committee of Actions for Côte d'Ivoire. It was a pleasure to have you share your insight on this edition of the program. And I'll say thank you, Kwali TITILOPE, for taking out time to be with us on today's edition of Talking Point. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of today's edition of Talking Point on 4U Media Africa. We believe you learned a lot from today's exchange vis-a-vis Africa's strive for economic independence. Meanwhile, it's often said that as a united continent, we are strong. So, Africans, it stands with you and I. And we have come to the end. Do stay glued to more programs on 4U Media Africa.